All right, how is everybody doing today? Today I wanted to go through the auditory system. So when we look at hearing, we hear in sound waves. So our ears pick up different sound waves. They can be really short and narrow sound waves, which are the high frequencies, or they can be very long and lengthy sound waves, which is where a lot of the bass is. What happens is when we look at our pinna or our ear, we capture the sound. I'm going to point to it here on the screen, and that sound comes through the ear canal and it hits our eardrum. And our eardrum is just like a drum. It vibrates back and forth. And as it vibrates back and forth, it then pushes the sound through the ossicles, which are the three tiniest bones here, and they get pushed into this snail-shaped organ called the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, you have little tiny hair cells or hair cilii. This is kind of what they look like down here at the bottom. And what happens is they start to stimulate. And as they stimulate, they send the signal through the auditory nerve up to the brain, and the brain processes the sound on the sides of the brain. And that's typically how we pick up sound and how we hear. So when you come in for an appointment, what we're looking at is first, is there anything that's happening outside here in the outer portion of the ear that's causing anything to hinder sound from reaching the brain, right? Do we have a bunch of earwax buildup? Do we have a foreign object stuck in the ear? Do we have a hole in the eardrum? So there's things like that that I'm looking at when you come in for your appointment. And then I'm also testing to find out, do we have any issues in the middle ear? Do we have fluid that's built up? Or do we have the ossicles that are not pushing the sound in like they need to, right? So most of the time, these things are gonna be working fine. What the issue is going to be these little hair cilii or hair cells inside the cochlea. Now I want you to picture a toothbrush, right? You look at the brand new toothbrush, the bristles are very, very straight, very, very sensitive, and that's the same thing with the hair cells inside the cochlea. Well, what happens is over time, they start to bend, right? So as they bend, now they're not as sensitive as they used to be. And that typically for us will cause us to start to raise the volume on our phone or on the TV. It'll get us to start questioning, are we hearing right? And the brain saying, I'm not getting the whole message, like make it louder, right? And you have some of those hair cells that can stimulate and others that cannot. Well, when that happens and it goes through the auditory nerve to the brain's getting parts of words. Right? So then the brain's trying to figure out, did you just say peach or teach, hot or pot? I'm hearing part of the word, just not all of it, and it gets us to ask people to repeat. And if this happens for an extended period of time, well, then we start to get to the point where we notice, okay, I'm not picking up, I'm not hearing as well as I could be. And then we go through this phase of denial where, no, it's not me, it must be them, they're not enunciating, they're not speaking clear enough, and what's happening is we're not getting the signal like we need to. And if this continues to occur, it does have effects on the brain, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But it can cause us to either one, be shaking our head like we're hearing the person and not hearing or understanding anything at all. We could be getting parts of words, hearing every third or fourth word, and we're trying to figure out what the word is, what are they even talking about. And this can cause a lot of things within us where we get to the point where we just don't enjoy going and hanging out with everybody in a restaurant or a crowd where there's noise. So we tend to say, oh, well, you guys go hang out and don't worry about me. And that can start to cause other issues, right? Because now what we're doing is we're isolating, that isolation can start to lead into depression. And that's not what we want to have happen, but that's what happens to thousands and thousands of people when they start to develop hearing loss and don't realize that it's them. So getting your hearing tested is very vital, very important, and I commend you for scheduling an appointment and getting that set up. But those hair cells, they'll wear out. They wear out due to age. It could be loud noise exposure. It could be hereditary, right? It runs in the family. It could be certain medication. Like there's all these different factors that can cause those hair cells to wear out. And when they're wearing out, we can't grow them back, right? So it's just like a toothbrush. You've used it a ton, you throw it away and get a new one. Well, we can't necessarily go get a new cochlea and stick it in our ears or in our head. So what happens is when those signals are partially getting to the brain and the brain's trying to figure it out, well, normally we process sound on the sides of the brain, and when we don't get parts of the words, now we start to use our cognitive, right? We use our frontal lobe, which is for our problem solving, for our memory. There's all these functions that that portion of the brain does and is used for. But if we're stealing energy that's used for memory and problem solving and all that to decipher and figure out what the words are, and this happens for an extended period of time, well, that can start to lead into other issues like Alzheimer's, dementia. And back in 2011, Johns Hopkins Medicine did link Alzheimer's and dementia to hearing loss. And there's been many studies since then that have showed the effects of those that don't have hearing devices and compared to those that do have hearing devices and wear them, and the effect that it has on their memory, right? So that's not the only way that we can develop Alzheimer's and dementia, but there has been a pretty strong link. Now, I've had a patient in Chicago. He was a farmer. He had hearing loss for 35 years, knew he had hearing loss. His wife kept telling him, go get your hearing checked. And he kept putting it off. And then finally it got to the point where she was so tired of yelling as loud as she could and him not hearing her that she's like, I can't live like this anymore. And if you're not going to go get your hearing tested, then I'm going to get divorced. We're going to get divorced. And he's like, okay, I'll go. So he comes into the office and that's the first thing I say to him is, hey, what brings you in? And he's like, well, this is what's been going on. And I said, oh, okay. And in my mind thinking, great, we'll just make sound loud enough and fit him with a hearing device and we'll be able to help him hear again. So we tested his hearing and he was down at the very bottom in the profound range. So I needed to make it a lot louder. So when I made sound a lot louder and had to repeat the words back, I was surprised that he only understood 8% of the words. So what that means is that if I make sound loud enough, instead of him understanding 100% or hearing and understanding his wife, he's going to hear 8% of what she says compared to 0. And he's like, well, I don't want to hear 8%. I want to hear 100%. And this is the part that's hard for me because he had gone so long without treating his hearing loss that it had an effect on the way that he could process sound down the road. And he's not the only one. I have patients in different ranges. Some at 8%, right? I think he was the most extreme out of all of my patients, the thousands of patients that I've seen. But I have some patients where they're at 50%, 60, right? They're in the 80% range, 100%. Like you want to be at 100%. But if you're not using that muscle, what happens is your brain atrophies. And as it atrophies, we really don't get that back. So we want to find out exactly where we're at, and we want to treat the hearing loss. And that's what a hearing device would do, is it would actually cause the signal to get into those hair cells to stimulate, so then the brain can hear and not have to decipher what the words are, okay? So this is the anatomy portion of the video. If you have any questions about this, feel free to ask me in your appointment so we can kind of go into a little bit more detail, but that's what's physically happening. We're trying to find out if there's an issue, and if, like I said, if the main issue is here with these hair cells inside the cochlea, then we're looking at a hearing device for the solution. If for some reason that's not where the problem is, if the problem's in the middle ear or in the outer ear, then we're looking at medication or surgery, which I don't specialize in right now. So again, I send you to an ear, nose, and throat specialist who can go through and prescribe medication and do the surgery. But for most of my patients, like 95%, or probably even higher than that, most of the patients, the problem's right here. And they just need the right hearing device that fits their hearing loss, their lifestyle, and their budget. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me at your next appointment, and I'll see you in the next video.